Now, live from your local news source, this is ABC 27 News at noon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Crummell. Pennsylvania Republicans continue demanding photo ID for voters because they worry about voter fraud if people don't have to show an ID. Democrats worry a photo ID requirement could disproportionately disenfranchise minority voters. Which party is right? New information suggests the answer might be neither of them. Seth Kaplan, live in the ABC 27 newsroom to explain. Good afternoon, Seth.
Good afternoon, James. Yeah, you hear this stuff talked about theoretically, but now we have some actual numbers. First, though, here were PA House Republicans calling once again this morning for a photo ID requirement. They say, hey, you need photo ID for so many other things in life. You should need to show it for something as important as voting to prove you're who you say you are. Democrats are just as adamant about saying maybe showing ID is easy for most of us, but there are people among us who don't drive and don't have an easy time doing anything in life, but are allowed to vote and should be able to do that. Well, those were exactly the arguments being made for a decade down in North Carolina, where Republicans got their way and a voter photo ID requirement was in place for the first time for that state's March presidential primary. So now, forget the theories. What do the actual numbers say? Well, nearly 2 million people voted. Fewer than 500 couldn't vote because they didn't have ID.
174 were Republicans. 171 were Democrats. There were just under 300 white voters and 74 black voters. So at first glance, there was no real disparity in terms of who photo ID was impacting. Now, on the other hand, the issue of fraud, the North Carolina State Board of Elections after 2016 did a detailed audit of the election. There was only 1 or 2 cases of in-person voter fraud, someone trying to vote twice or vote in someone else's name out of millions of ballots cast. So really a non-existent problem that photo ID is trying to solve.
Reporter Steve Harrison there from the public radio station in Charlotte, North Carolina, the first and only reporter to actually do that analysis, which either has or at least should have big implications in Pennsylvania in terms of how both parties look at this story. So is there some kind of deal to be had? Is North Carolina, you might say, the ghost of Pennsylvania future? And if so, maybe it's not so scary a future for either party. Much more coming up, James, tonight beginning at 5.
Seth, it was very interesting hearing him talk about, actually diving into the data, looking at the actual numbers to see what exactly happened there in North Carolina when they instituted this. Okay, so when we bring this back here to Pennsylvania, where do we stand? Is this something that's moving forward, or is this just still being talked about?
Well, it's still being talked about, but in very strong terms. Republicans are adamant they want, if they can't get it through the legislative process, perhaps an amendment, a constitutional amendment that would require voter ID here. Democrats have said, they're just as strong against it, but Democrats also want some other things, and Republicans also want some other things. So the question here is whether this is something where, Republicans can get something that they would view as a major win, and if Democrats were willing to concede it in exchange for things that, forget the philosophy, might have even more impact, is there some kind of deal to be worked out? Past few legislative sessions, it hasn't happened. Let's see this time.
We'll absolutely wait and see for that one. All right, I'm not going to hold my breath, though. All right, Seth Kaplan live in the ABC 27 newsroom. Thank you very much for that.